Kyren Wallace stood in front of the whiteboard, his hands still stained with engine grease from helping his father fix their van. And yet he'd just solved the hardest equation in school history. The room went silent, until the teacher sneered, "There's no way you did that without cheating." Laughter erupted. His classmates filmed, his grade was erased. But what they didn't know, that one accusation would spark the most explosive academic scandal in the country. And Kyren wasn't done proving them wrong. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun poured through the tall windows of Jefferson Central High, a school draped in prestige and legacy. Trophy cases lined the main hall, filled with silver-plated memories from students who had names that opened doors before they even learned how to knock. Names tied to money, influence, legacy. But at the back of room 312, beneath a flickering ceiling light and 3 cracked tiles, sat Kyren Wallace, 17, sharp, reserved, a student of silence and observation. While most kids in this school wore the latest sneakers and discussed their weekend ski trips, Kyren wore hand-me-downs and kept to himself. His backpack was faded at the seams, his shoes scuffed near the toe. He knew every inch of those math books better than he knew most kids' names. That morning, the class buzzed with a restless energy. The air smelled faintly of markers and perfume, and the whiteboard up front was covered in a dizzying equation about linear transformations. Mr. Halbrake, the AP calculus teacher, stood with a marker in one hand and a condescending grin smeared across his face. He liked to test students, not to teach them but to trip them. "All right," he said, turning to the class. "Who can solve this?" He tapped the board, the equation winding like a snake across the surface. "This one's a bit above your level. Maybe someone whose parents paid for that fancy prep over the summer." Laughter rippled through the front rows. A few students smirked, leaning back in their chairs. Asher Denham, the golden boy of the class, raised his hand lazily and offered a wrong answer with unearned confidence. Mr. Halbrake chuckled, then scanned the room. His eyes passed over Kyren like he wasn't even there, like he was part of the paint on the walls. And then, against instinct, against every fiber in him, trained to avoid attention, Kyren raised his hand. The room paused.
Mr. Halbrake raised an eyebrow. "Wallace, you have something to add?"
Kyren's voice was even, but low. "I can solve it." The class turned. A few whispers. One student whispered, "Wait, who even is that kid?" "Go ahead, Wallace," Mr. Halbrake said, amused. "Show us what private tutoring buys these days." Kyren walked to the board, his steps steady. No folder in hand, no calculator, just his mind, built not in a lab, but in silence. In long nights under dim lights, while his father drove the late shift to keep the electricity on, he picked up the marker. His hands didn't shake. Step by step, Kyren unraveled the equation, breaking it down like layers of a song only he could hear. His writing was neat, confident. In less than 2 minutes he reached the correct answer, boxed, labeled, and annotated. The silence in the room was deafening. Even Mr. Halbrake stared, lips slightly parted. "That's correct," he finally muttered, his tone hesitant. Then louder, as if trying to reassert control. "But let's be real here, there's no way you got that without some help." Kyren didn't flinch. "Private tuition?" Mr. Halbrake scoffed, gesturing to the board. "That's not beginner work. Where'd you learn that? Online videos? Or maybe someone gave you the answer earlier?" A few students chuckled nervously. Kyren said nothing. He tapped the marker and returned to his seat. His face was unreadable, but something behind his eyes had changed. Not rage, not sadness, something deeper. A quiet snapping, like a string pulled too tight for too long. From the front, Asher leaned toward his friends and muttered just loud enough, "No way that guy solved it. His dad drives buses, not formulas." Another laugh. Kyren didn't respond. He opened his notebook and resumed writing, but it wasn't notes. Not anymore. That evening, the Wallace apartment hummed with the sound of the stovetop radio and an old box fan pushing warm air. Malcolm Wallace, Kyren's father, was still in his driver's uniform, maroon hat in hand, his shirt collar stained from the day's heat. "Good day, champ?" he asked, setting down his keys and pulling off his shoes. Kyren nodded vaguely. "Same as usual." Malcolm raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He knew that tone, knew when to ask, and when to give space. Kyren retreated to the corner of their small shared dining space, flipping open his laptop. He wasn't doing homework. He was searching something he'd overheard in the hallway that week. The District Innovation in Engineering Showcase, a science competition for public school students across the state. A massive opportunity if you were recommended by your school's faculty. And that was the catch. His eyes scanned the web page, absorbing every line of eligibility. At first, it was hopeless. Must be nominated by a STEM teacher or department head. He exhaled, frustrated. Of course, another door locked before he could even knock. But then, a flicker. A hyperlink labeled manual entry for underserved zip codes. Kyren clicked. A pop-up appeared. Students from Title I designated schools may submit independent applications with supplemental project documentation. Jefferson Central was one of the only Title I schools in their county, not because it lacked funding, but because its minority population skewed the numbers. Kyren sat back, heart pounding. The application window closed in 5 days. All he needed was a working prototype and detailed documentation, and he already had the idea. A real-time data compression model for decentralized devices, something he'd been sketching out for months in his notebooks. It started as a challenge to himself. Could he make a smart home hub run on half the processing power? Then it became an obsession. He built flowcharts, wrote pseudocode, even tested a crude simulation. He stared at the application. His finger hovered over the button. Then he clicked start. Behind him, his father was humming an old gospel tune while stirring rice on the stove. The sound grounded Kyren, reminded him of every night he watched his dad come home, bone-tired but never bitter. Kyren would build this, not to prove a teacher wrong, not even to win, but because it was his mind, his fight. He opened a blank page and began writing. Project title: Lolux, Lightweight Universal Compression for Edge Devices. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m. The keys kept clicking. In a small classroom where dreams were questioned by skin tone, something had been planted, something resilient. And that night, in a corner apartment with peeling wallpaper and borrowed Wi-Fi, it began to grow. Kyren's cursor pauses as he stumbles upon a hidden submission clause, a rare loophole that bypasses teacher validation completely. One almost no one knows exists, and one that could change the game forever. Kyren sat at the dining table long after his father fell asleep. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the clicking of keys under his fingers. The glow of the screen lit half of his face, reflecting two things at once: exhaustion and fire. He wasn't just filling forms. He was pushing against a wall that wasn't built to move. The application portal asked for credentials he didn't have: teacher endorsements, lab affiliations, test scores from expensive summer programs, all markers of privilege masquerading as merit. Kyren paused, scrolling through the form, wondering if this entire competition existed only to crown the already crowned. Still, he kept going. He uploaded schematics, code sequences, compression test results, even a short video demonstrating how his algorithm could reduce data weight without sacrificing clarity. At the bottom of the screen was a line he had almost missed the night before. Manual submission pathway. A loophole. A quiet side door never meant to be used. He clicked it. A new page appeared, less polished, less advertised, and suddenly, it was clear. This wasn't broken design. This was intentional. The competition wanted to appear open, but the real path, the one everyone used, was through teacher letters and school endorsements. This form wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to be buried. But buried things could be found. Kyren typed his zip code, and the field immediately autofilled. Low-income designation confirmed. He felt that familiar sting. Even here, even in brilliance, his place in the world was reduced to a data point of deficiency. Still, he kept going. A prompt appeared asking him to list any mentor, supervisor, or STEM-affiliated sponsor. He left it blank. The system flashed a warning in red text, but after a silent second, it allowed him to proceed. He uploaded his entire project. Every algorithm, every line of logic, every idea born at a scratched kitchen table, with borrowed textbooks and a second-hand laptop. Finally, he reached the last button. Submit. He hovered, then pressed it. A spinning icon appeared, then a green check. Submission received. Kyren leaned back in his chair, suddenly aware of how late it was, how heavy his eyelids felt, how loud his heartbeat had become. He didn't know that the moment he clicked submit, a second process woke up inside the system. A hidden script, one never mentioned in any public-facing document. The bias integrity filter. A quiet digital gatekeeper built on a lie, ensuring fairness by validating entries. Instead, it sorted them. Zip code flagged. No teacher recommendation. Flagged. No institution affiliation flagged. Unfamiliar surname. Flagged. Black student from a Title I school. Double flagged. And somewhere in the district's server, barely monitored, barely questioned, the system rerouted his submission into a review bin labeled, secondary evaluation required, which might as well have said, put this where no one will see it. The next morning, Kyren walked to school like any other day, backpack slung low, shoulders quiet, eyes alert. No one knew. Not his father. Not his classmates. Not his teacher. Especially not his teacher. Mr. Halbrake was passing back test papers when Kyren slipped into class. The man barely looked at him. He handed an A to the white girl in the front row, with a wink, then stopped when he reached Kyren's desk. He dropped the paper with a flat, unimpressed tone. Good. For someone with no formal prep. Kyren didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had work moving quietly in the background, that this man would never understand. But across the building, somewhere in the digital airflow of administrative access, something unexpected happened. Someone opened the secondary review bin. Miss Emery Collins, 32 years old, recently transferred from a district in Vermont, was working late in the admin office. She was new. She was thorough. And unlike most staff here, she was curious. She clicked the bin no one touched. Inside were dozens of discarded applications. Grainy photos of poster boards. Incomplete PDFs. Projects with potential buried under poor formatting. Then one file stood out. Lux Compression Kyren Wallace. She clicked it. And the room shifted. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the diagrams, then the code. She sat forward, slowly, and kept reading. This wasn't thrown together work. This was architecture, strategy, vision. A student doing graduate-level compression theory?
That didn't happen. Not here. Not like this.
She clicked his listed school, Jefferson Central High. She knew that school. She'd seen the patterns. Who got promoted? Who got ignored? She whispered to herself, how did this land here? Then she checked his file. No teacher recommendation. No sponsor. No extra classes. Just one line. Independent submission. That told her everything. Someone didn't believe in him. Someone didn't vouch for him. Someone didn't want him to be seen. Miss Collins looked around the empty office. The walls hummed with old district politics and quiet racism disguised as procedure. She knew exactly what she was supposed to do. Archive it. Delete it. Pretend she never saw it. Instead, she did something dangerous. She forwarded it, directly, to a private inbox listed on the district's science competition page. A name she recognized. Dr. Helena Weiss. A woman with power, academic weight, and a reputation for spotting mind that didn't come from wealth. Collins hesitated, then typed, Dr. Weiss. You need to see this one. No recommendation. But the work speaks for itself. She hit send. Then she sat back and exhaled. She didn't know what was coming. Not yet. But she knew one thing. Nothing about this student was accidental. While this was happening, Kyren was quietly eating lunch alone, beneath the busted clock in the cafeteria hallway. He was flipping through a notebook, not sketching equations this time, but ideas, how to improve, how to refine, how to make his project undeniable, if he somehow made it to the next round. He didn't know a stranger had just changed his future. He didn't know his work was now in front of a woman who chaired national grant committees. He didn't know he had just bypassed the very machine built to bury him. Across the city, Dr. Helena Weiss was sitting in her university office when the email arrived. She clicked it without much thought. She received hundreds of submissions a week. She skimmed the first page. Then she stopped. Then she read it again. She leaned closer, mouth slightly open. Finally she whispered, my God. This wasn't just good. This was groundbreaking. Not polished. Not supported. Not mentored. But raw genius. The kind that doesn't wait for permission. She clicked the attachment again. Then checked the school. Then the student's name. She leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling, realizing how rare this was. A kid no one believed in. A system designed to ignore him. And still he built something no one else had. She clicked reply. I want to see him compete. She didn't carbon copy the school. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for the district. She forwarded the file again. This time to the national board. Then she added 5 words that would change the course of everything. Find a place for him. Within hours, Jefferson Central's internal admin system registered an alert. Someone with far more power had just overridden their filters. And somewhere in the school office, a certain teacher was about to learn that the student he tried to belittle had just been elevated above every boundary he thought would hold him down. The email that Dr. Helena Weiss sent didn't just travel, it detonated. By morning, an automatic system update hit Jefferson Central High, tripping an alert in the administration dashboard. A student from their school had been fast-tracked to the National Science and Engineering Competition. No teacher recommendation, no department approval, no prior state-level placement. Yet somehow he was in. The notification wasn't public. Not yet. Only visible to senior staff, select faculty, and the school's internal competition coordinator, who happened to be the same person who taught Kyren calculus, Mr. Halbrake. He saw the name and froze. Kyren Wallace. For a long moment he didn't move. He just stared at the screen like it was lying to him. Like reality had malfunctioned somewhere between the dusty chalkboard and the school's outdated computer lab. He clicked the file. There it was. Project title, LUX, Lightweight Universal Compression for Edge Devices. He scrolled slowly. Every line, every diagram, every calculated result made the air feel heavier. He whispered under his breath. This isn't possible. His mind didn't go to curiosity, or pride, or even disbelief. It went straight to suspicion. Because in his worldview, brilliance didn't come from kids like Kyren. It came from kids like Asher Denham, the golden boy of Jefferson Central, white, wealthy, confident, captain of the coding club, winner of every competition for 3 years straight, and most importantly, son of Gerard Denham, tech CEO, major district donor, a man whose words carried more weight than entire committees. Halbrake grabbed his phone. His voice was already forming the message. Gerard, we need to talk. Now. Asher found out first, standing near his locker, surrounded by his usual orbit of friends. He was halfway through bragging about his early admission interviews when he overheard 2 seniors talking. They say someone got fast-tracked from this school. Straight to nationals. Who? Probably Asher again. No, it's some kid from Halbrake's class. Wallace or something. Asher turned. What did you just say? The seniors shrugged. One pointed. Wallace, the quiet one, sits in the back. Asher stared, unblinking. That's impossible. But inside, something spiked. Not fear, indignation. He walked away without another word, his jaw set hard, his posture rigid in a way that came from a lifetime of never being questioned. That night, Gerard Denham sat in his home office, a space filled with curved monitors, glass walls, and framed patents. The kind of place that existed in magazines, not real life. Halbrake sat across from him, nervous, sweating slightly, his voice low. I tried to warn you, he said. This isn't normal. It feels like someone bypassed protocol. Gerard leaned back, quiet for a long beat. So the boy, what's his deal? Halbrake shifted. Black. Low-income background. No academic sponsorship. No private tutoring. He solved advanced calculus in my class, but honestly it never felt legitimate. Gerard tapped a pen against his desk. Kid like that doesn't just suddenly outperform trained students. Especially not mine. Halbrake nodded. Exactly. Gerard didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply said, if a system lets someone cheat, you fix the system, then paused. And if someone is gaming the system, you expose them. He picked up his phone and called someone on speed dial. This is Denham. I need access to a student's submission file. Yes. Now. He wasn't asking. He was activating influence. By the next morning, the school's internal IT department had been quietly pulled into a forced investigation, not to validate Kyren's work, but to find evidence that it wasn't his. They pulled his district login, his cloud storage, his submitted files, even the source code from the application. The IT lead, Mrs. Porter, sighed as she opened the first file. She didn't know Kyren, never taught him, but she'd seen this pattern before, gifted black kids forced to prove innocence before allowed credit. Still, she followed orders. She opened the compression script, expecting to find copied patterns, plagiarized blocks, code similarities, something traceable. But the deeper she went, the stranger it became. This doesn't look like borrowed code, she murmured. She zoomed in. Multiple logic layers, cascading architectures. Every block commented in clean, non-academic language. Like he wrote it not for professors, but for future builders. One of her assistants leaned over. Is this AI generated? No, she said slowly. AI writes with repetition markers. This is intentional, human, and good. They kept digging. Hours passed. At one point, she paused, staring at a function buried deep in the file. Run a compiler on this, she said softly. The code executed, and something unexpected happened. The function didn't just compress data. It predicted compression limits, adjusting dynamically based on hardware stress. One assistant whispered. Who does that? Mrs. Porter swallowed. Someone who understands things this district doesn't teach. She leaned back, mind turning. This was real. Not stolen, not faked, not coached. Genius. And suddenly she didn't want to be part of destroying it. But she also knew something else. If Gerard Denham had started this process, it wouldn't stop here. Meanwhile, Kyren sat at his desk in class, unaware that a storm was gathering 3 floors above him. He wasn't thinking about investigations. He was thinking about the next phase of Lux. He was thinking about scalability, compression variance, and how to optimize for unstable internet environments, the kind found in neighborhoods like his. And yet something in the room felt different. Whispers moved like static. Asher kept looking back at him. And when class ended, Mr. Halbrake asked him to stay behind. Kyren paused. Yes, sir? Halbrake locked the classroom door. He didn't sit, didn't smile. We received notice that you submitted a project to the national competition, he said calmly. A project I was never informed about. Kyren held his gaze. I used the open submission route. It didn't require a teacher recommendation. Halbrake nodded slowly, with something cold in his eyes. And what exactly did you submit? A data compression framework. Self-adaptive logic. Lightweight implementation. Halbrake's lips thinned. As impressive as it sounds, it doesn't align with your academic file, or your background. Kyren felt something sharp in his chest. My background. Halbrake didn't blink. Yes, students who excel at this level usually come from structured support, advanced mentorship, privately funded programs. Kyren understood the subtext. Not from your side of town. He said nothing. Halbrake leaned closer. If this project turns out to be plagiarized, even partially, there will be consequences. Severe ones. Kyren replied, voice calm but edged with something growing stronger. Then I guess you should hope it isn't. Halbrake stared at him, startled for a split second by the quiet defiance. Then he straightened and unlocked the door. You may go. Kyren left without looking back. He didn't need validation anymore. He needed proof. Proof of his own worth. And proof that systems built to keep him small were cracks, not walls. That afternoon, Gerard Denham was waiting for the IT report. He was prepared to hear what he expected. Copied code, borrowed logic. Something disqualifying. Instead, the call began with silence. Mrs. Porter cleared her throat. Mr. Denham, there's no evidence of plagiarism. He dialed back his tone. Meaning what? Meaning the work appears original. Fully. He didn't like that. Check again. We did. Twice. He exhaled through his nose, annoyed. Then what is it? She hesitated. There's a section of code in the core logic that none of us understand. Not me. Not my staff. It's ahead of the standard model. His voice cooled. You're telling me a low-income student with no professional training wrote code your department can't decipher? Yes. She said. That's exactly what I'm telling you. There was another pause, but this one felt different. Something in Gerard's posture shifted. Suspicion didn't fade. But something else entered. A threat forming in silence. Send me the code, he said. Directly. She swallowed. Do you plan to share it with competition officials? No, he said quietly. I have someone better in mind. But here was the twist no one expected. As Mrs. Porter sent the file, she accidentally left one line of the administration log visible at the bottom. A timestamp. A flag. File reviewed by external third-party observer. Unknown credential. High-level access override. Only one person in the school saw it. A junior assistant, reading over her shoulder. He whispered, someone outside the district already saw this, and they weren't supposed to. For the first time, the investigation wasn't in control. Something or someone else was now in play. Across town, Kyren sat in his room, working quietly, unaware that his code was being printed analyzed, weaponized, doubted, feared, and studied by people who believed he shouldn't have been able to create it at all. He typed something new, a patch to strengthen the adaptive threshold. And somewhere inside the code, a microthread activated, a signature line, a thought only he would ever see. They never believed genius could live here, so I built it anyway. He saved the file. But before he could shut down his laptop, something strange happened. A notification blinked across his screen. Your project file was accessed by an unauthorized administrator. Kyren stared at it. Then the screen flickered, and a second message appeared. One written in plain system text. You're being watched. In the school's IT office, the team stares at the line of code they can't interpret, a recursive logic loop with no known origin. But buried inside they discover something else, a signature marker. One no database can trace, yet unmistakably written by Kyren's own hand. Kyren felt the weight shift before he knew why. He sat in second period English, but his mind was still inside his laptop screen, replaying the alert, unauthorized access. Someone was inside his work, not observing, but probing, trying to break it, trying to claim it didn't belong to him. The clock ticked, the teacher spoke. Pages turned. Every sound felt distant, muffled, like he was underwater. Then the classroom door opened. Two administrators stepped inside, Mrs. Felton, the assistant principal, and a man Kyren didn't recognize, wearing a district lanyard and a controlled expression. A third figure lingered behind them. Mr. Halbrake. Kyren Wallace, Mrs. Felton said, voice wooden. Come with us, please. The class went silent. No explanation. No warning. Just that cold summons. Kyren stood slowly, backpack still on his shoulder. He didn't ask why. Something in their eyes said this wasn't the kind of moment where truth mattered. As he followed them through the hallway, he heard someone whisper, what'd he do? Probably hacked something. Or cheated. He walked on. They led him into a small conference room, one with no windows. Just a table. 4 chairs. A faint smell of dust and fear. Sit, the lanyard man said. Kyren did. No one offered him water. No one called his father. No one explained his rights. And at a public school, no one needed to, not unless they cared about fairness. The man opened a folder. We're launching an academic integrity review, he said, monotone. Your submission to the national science competition has raised significant concerns. Kyren kept his voice steady. What concerns? Mrs. Felton folded her hands, leaning forward with forced patience. Your project file is remarkably advanced. In fact, too advanced for a student with your academic profile and background. Background. There it was again. That word, the one they thought was neutral, but always pointed in the same direction. You mean because I didn't go to STEM camps, Kyren said. Because I don't have a private tutor. Because my father's a driver instead of an engineer. Halbrake stepped forward then, voice sharp. Kyren, this isn't about class. It's about honesty. If you had help, we need to know. If you copied this code, even unknowingly, now is the time to tell the truth. Kyren met his eyes. I wrote it myself. The lanyard man slid a printed page across the table. A fragment of Kyren's algorithm, rewritten with annotations they clearly did not understand. Explain this section, he said. Kyren scanned it. It was the adaptive compression threshold, the part they'd been stuck on. He spoke carefully, keeping his voice firm. It adjusts based on environmental constraints. If local storage is limited, it calculates the ideal compression ratio automatically. Halbrake cut him off. This is graduate-level work. You expect us to believe you did this in your bedroom? Kyren didn't blink. That's exactly where I did it. Mrs. Felton sighed, the kind of sigh that said we've already decided who you are. Kyren, plagiarism isn't just copying. Sometimes it's being influenced by work beyond your level. Work you don't fully understand, but still attempt to claim. Her voice softened, but only on the surface. If you admit now that someone helped you, this will be easier on you academically. We can limit the damage. We can protect your record. Kyren stared at her. You want me to confess to something I didn't do because you can't believe someone like me could build something like this. Silent. Not a silence of doubt. A silence of offense. Halbrake spoke again, quieter now, like he was speaking to someone smaller. You're making this hard on yourself. Kyren leaned forward. No. You made it hard the moment you decided. Genius has a color.
Bliss.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in the building, the school IT team was still staring at the mysterious line of code that triggered this entire storm. One engineer, a younger one, whispered something risky. What if he's just that smart? Another shook his head. Kids like him don't get this far. That sentence hung in the air, true only in the way racism is true. Not by nature, but by force. Back in the interrogation room, the lanyard man closed the folder. Until we complete this investigation, your application will be suspended. Kyren's voice didn't rise. It cut. Without telling me. Without telling my father. Without proof. That's enough. Hellbreak snapped. But Kyren kept going. You didn't ask how I learned to code. You didn't ask how long I've studied compression models. You didn't ask about the nights I stayed up working while my dad slept after a 14-hour shift. His voice sharpened. Not loud, but undeniable. You didn't ask anything. You went straight to "this can't be yours." Mrs. Felton stood. This meeting is over. You'll remain in supervised study until we sort this out. Which meant isolation. Surveillance. Punishment before verdict. Kyren stood too, but not as someone defeated. As someone who had nothing left to hide, and nothing left to lose. They escorted him out. And they thought that would be the end of it. They thought silence would protect them. But something had changed. Because the whole time the interrogation had been recorded. Not by them. By a student tech who had been testing new security cameras for a digital media project. Cameras that were tied to a private server he still had access to. He didn't know Kyren well. He didn't even know what the meeting was about. But when he saw 3 adults cornering a single student alone in a room with no windows, and heard their tone, something in him snapped. He clipped the footage, color corrected it, overlaid the subtitles. This level of work doesn't come from your background. Students like you don't produce this kind of code. Confess now, and we'll protect your future. Then he posted it.
No caption.
No commentary. Just the truth. In its naked, ugliest form. He shared it on Twitter, expecting maybe a few classmates to see it. Instead, in under an hour, the tweet hit 10,000, then 2,000. Comments poured in. They're bullying a genius because he's black. This is how talent gets buried. Systemic racism isn't loud. This is what it looks like. Driver's son writes better code than their sons. That's the real threat. By midnight, "Let Kyren Compete" was trending in 4 states. And by dawn, every news outlet had seen the clip. Kyren woke up to his phone vibrating non-stop. Messages, tags, strangers demanding justice, coders offering mentorship, activists calling the school racist, universities asking for his contact. He hadn't said a single word publicly, but the world was speaking for him now. And the school, the same one that tried to bury him, was about to face something it had never expected: accountability. As the video goes viral, a national journalist reaches out, and on live morning television, she says the words that flip the entire situation on its head. Sources confirm the student's algorithm has already captured the interest of a federal research lab. Kyren stared at his phone, its screen glowing against the early morning light, filtering through the blinds. His name was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. His face was being reposted with captions like "Black STEM Excellence," and "This is what overlooked brilliance looks like." Someone had even made a video montage of his classroom interrogation spliced with his code demo, and overlaid it with Kendrick Lamar's DNA. By 8:10 a.m., "Let Kyren Compete" had been tweeted over 400,000 times. He scrolled, stunned, watching strangers defend him more passionately than anyone inside his school ever had. Tech professionals, software engineers, and even a few well-known black entrepreneurs started reposting the interrogation clip with captions like, "Imagine being this smart and still having to prove you belong. He doesn't need their stage. He is the stage." Kyren wasn't used to attention. Definitely not praise. He had trained himself to move quietly, to build in the shadows. But now the shadows were gone, and so was his anonymity. He didn't know whether to feel seen or hunted. In the kitchen, his father Malcolm stood holding a mug of coffee he hadn't sipped. He'd watched the video 3 times that morning, not because he didn't understand it, but because he couldn't believe how calm his son had been in the face of that interrogation. He kept replaying that moment when Kyren said, "You decided genius has a color." It cracked something inside him. Malcolm had driven buses, cleaned cars, even patched roads to keep food on the table. But this was the cost of raising a black child who dared to outshine their expectations. Kyren entered the room, quiet, hesitant. "I didn't post it," he said. Malcolm nodded. "I know the video, the trend. I didn't You shouldn't have to explain brilliance, Malcolm said. His voice was steady but deep with pain. They should be thanking you for showing them what's possible. Kyren sat, shoulders slouched. They're not. They're calling it cheating. Pity. Affirmative action in disguise. Malcolm finally took a sip, then looked his son in the eyes. That's not new. That's just scared people trying to make your fire fit inside their box. By noon, the media machine had kicked in. A national morning show ran a segment titled, Black Student Bullied for Brilliance. A popular podcast interviewed a retired professor who reviewed Kyren's algorithm and said it had federal-level implications. And then, a bombshell. A journalist tweeted, sources confirm the student's compression algorithm was flagged by a federal tech advisor for immediate review. It's that groundbreaking. The tweet detonated across timelines. Within minutes, every tech blog, activist account, and educator's feed lit up. People weren't just defending Kyren anymore. They were celebrating him. But not everyone saw him as a genius. By early afternoon, the pushback began. Right-wing commentators jumped on the trend, spinning the narrative in predictable but brutal directions. We don't vet black excellence anymore. We just trend it. This is what happens when we prioritize woke optics over real merit. Where's the proof this kid didn't use AI? They found an old picture of Kyren's apartment building and turned it into a meme. From the projects to programming miracles? Sure, Jan. Anonymous trolls posted screenshots of his code with snarky captions like, looks like ChatGPT helped more than his daddy did. Some accounts doxed his school. Others targeted him directly. Racist slurs layered under sarcastic praise. His school's website was flooded with hundreds of comments, half of them venomous. Affirmative action fraud. No way a driver's kid built that. Reverse racism is real. Look at this. The school went into PR lockdown. By 2:02 p.m., the principal called Malcolm Wallace. His tone was rehearsed. Political. We're concerned about the sudden exposure, Mr. Wallace. We support Kyren, of course. But things are escalating. Malcolm didn't interrupt. He knew where this was going. The principal continued. We're receiving threats. Our staff is overwhelmed. The attention is divisive. Finally, the mask dropped. We'd like to suggest for everyone's safety, and to protect Kyren from further scrutiny, that you consider withdrawing him quietly from the competition. Malcolm's voice was dry. You want us to back out so the district doesn't look racist. That's not what I said. But that's what you meant. A beat of silence. I'm asking you to think of what's best for him. Malcolm laughed, but there was no joy in it. I have. Every day since he was born. Then he hung up. That night, Malcolm sat in the same kitchen where he once helped Kyren with his multiplication tables. He opened his phone, looked into the camera, and began to speak. He didn't script it. He didn't plan it. He just talked. Talked like a father who had carried too much silence for too long.
My name is Malcolm Wallace, he said.
I'm a driver for the Jefferson School District. And my son, the one the world is talking about, didn't become a genius last week. He's been one. He paused, collecting his breath. He taught himself code from books we checked out of secondhand libraries. He built his first data model on a cracked laptop I bought from a pawn shop. We didn't have mentors. We had grit. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. I've cleaned vomit out of school buses to make sure our lights stayed on, while he taught himself math. I couldn't pronounce. I watched him build a machine in his head that no one could see. And now that it's out, now that he's shining, you tell me it's too much. He leaned in. You didn't doubt his code. You doubted where it came from. Malcolm ended with a quiet truth. I didn't raise a problem. I raised a solution. If that scares you, maybe it should. Then he hit post. The video spread faster than anything else. It wasn't just a father defending his son. It was the story of every parent who had ever watched the world try to dim their child's light. Journalists quoted him. Activists replayed the clip during protests. Tech giants retweeted the line. You didn't doubt his code. You doubted where it came from. By midnight, Kyren Wallace had gone from local controversy to national reckoning. The school's inbox was overloaded. The district's silence was condemned on live television. Someone spray-painted across the front gate of Jefferson Central. He built it anyway. But in the middle of that explosion, Kyren wasn't celebrating.
He was lying on his bed, eyes open, heart racing.
Because while the world praised him, it also dissected him. They didn't see Kyren Wallace. They saw a symbol, a debate, a battleground. His childhood photos were being dug up. His family's financial status was being analyzed. Even his silence was being weaponized. Why hasn't he said anything? What's he hiding? He wasn't hiding. He was surviving. And through the paper-thin walls of their apartment, he heard his father's voice again, not the viral version, but the quiet one, talking to someone on the phone. They want us to move. Said it's not safe anymore. A pause. No, I'm not pulling him, he's earned this. They'll have to drag him out. At 3:47 a.m., Karen's inbox pings, not from a news outlet or social media, but from a private encrypted address. We've reviewed your algorithm. It's bigger than a competition. Let's talk. ASCP, US GovTech Division. Malcolm Wallace didn't mean to become a symbol. He was a father, a driver, a man who had made peace with staying invisible, so his son could rise. But now, the world had pulled back the curtain, and the van he drove every day, the one with the cracked dashboard and worn steering wheel, had become the pulpit for a generation's pain. After the video of him went viral, Malcolm's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Journalists, bloggers, celebrities, parents from neighborhoods just like his, and parents from places he'd never stepped foot in, all thanking him, all asking for more. But it wasn't the attention that got to him. It was the messages from other fathers. Men with calloused hands and tired eyes. Men who'd worked night shifts and graveyard hours. All so their kids could maybe, just maybe, touch something better. Malcolm didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as necessary. So when the calls got too loud, and the silence from the district too sharp, he did what came naturally. He spoke, not in a studio, not on a stage, but from the place where he'd spent half his life, his van. He propped up his phone on the dashboard with an old CD case, and hit record. No makeup, no prep, just truth. I'm Malcolm Wallace, he began, eyes steady, and this van saved my son's future more times than I can count. He looked into the camera, voice catching in his throat. There were nights I slept in the seat because we couldn't afford heat. I drove late shifts to keep the lights on while Kyren sat in the back seat, under this dome light, writing code on a second-hand laptop. He'd fall asleep with books on his chest and dreams in his head. He blinked. Hard. This van ain't much to look at, but it's where genius happened. And now the world sees him. He paused. His hands trembled slightly, gripping the wheel. They tried to tell my son he couldn't have made what he did, that it was too advanced, that it had to come from someone else. But they weren't there for the nights. We had to decide between dinner or data. They weren't there when I pawned my watch to replace his hard drive. The emotion in his voice deepened. My son didn't cheat. He built. He didn't lie. He learned. And if that scares you, then maybe what you're really scared of is what happens when brilliance comes from the wrong side of town. He ended quietly. Don't punish the dreamers just because you didn't dream big enough.
Then he tapped post.
Within an hour, it reached 1 million views. By the end of the day, it became a global anthem. The van speech. They called it. Clipped? Remixed? Played over motivational videos. It was quoted at rallies, printed on posters, even added to educational campaigns. Commentators said it did more in 4 minutes than most politicians had in 4 years. But Malcolm didn't see the buzz. He was still driving, still clocking in. Because rent was still due. Because Kyren still needed shoes. Because attention doesn't pay the light bill. But something had changed. Donations started pouring in. Small amounts at first. $5, $10, then bigger ones. $100 transfers from people who said, I grew up like Kyren, or this reminded me of my own dad. A tech entrepreneur dropped 10 grand with a note that read, this should have never been necessary. Even celebrities got involved. One well-known black actor publicly offered to cover Kyren's college tuition, calling him a once-in-a-generation mind. News outlets begged for exclusive interviews. Documentary producers circled. But while the world leaned in, one voice stayed silent. The school district. Not a single press conference.
No apology.
No statement. Just panic behind closed doors, and a growing fear of litigation. Emails leaked showing administrators scrambling to control the narrative and minimize exposure. Legal teams were called. Internal reviews began. They weren't worried about Kyren's future. They were worried about their own. Meanwhile, Kyren watched it all unfold from the same bedroom where he built Alex. He didn't feel powerful. He felt exposed. He appreciated the support. But every headline, every interview request, every DM from strangers who now saw him as a symbol, it chipped away at the solitude he used to thrive in. He didn't build for claps. He built because his mind didn't know how not to. And now, the pressure to speak, to smile, to perform, it weighed heavier than any line of code he'd ever written. One afternoon, he walked into the living room and found his dad staring at a news clip of himself on TV. "You didn't have to do that," Kyren said. Malcolm turned slowly. "I know, but you did." Malcolm nodded. "Because they didn't see you." "Not really. I needed them to." Kyren sat beside him. "What if this all goes away? What if they stop caring tomorrow?" Malcolm looked at his son, then at the van keys on the table. "They can take back attention. They can take back praise. But they can't unsee what you built. And they'll never forget where it came from." Later that week, a brown envelope arrived at their doorstep. No return address. Just Karen's name, handwritten. He opened it cautiously, heart beating faster with each fold. Inside was a single letter. Official, sealed. National Science and Engineering Competition. Re-final round invitation. Immediate eligibility activation. Kieran's eyes scanned the letter 3 times before he could speak. The opening line read, "Due to the exceptional nature of your work, and a unanimous recommendation from federal and academic reviewers, you are hereby invited to the national finals of the competition. No regional qualifiers, no middle steps, straight to the final stage." The letter continued, "Your submission represents a breakthrough in adaptive compression theory. This invitation overrides all state-level requirements. Please confirm your attendance immediately." Malcolm read over his son's shoulder, stunned. "You skipped a line." "No," Kyren said softly. "I rewrote it." As they celebrate, Kyren gets a second letter slipped under the door. This one anonymous, typed in all caps. "Watch your back. They're not done with you." The hotel ballroom hosting the national finals looked more like the entrance to a tech conference than a school competition. Velvet ropes, name placards, LED banners rotating between corporate sponsors and the finalists' faces, most of them smiling in crisp suits, standing between mentors and teachers in $1,000 shoes. Kyren Wallace stepped off the hotel shuttle alone. No press handler. No sponsor badge. Just his father's old black backpack slung over one shoulder and a printed badge that read, "Independent Finalist." He looked around as valet drivers guided Teslas into reserved parking. A few parents gave him that tight, polite smile, the kind that flickered only when their assumptions were already halfway forming. Inside the registration desk, a volunteer handed him a thick folder. "You must be with," she paused, scanning the list. "Wallace." He nodded. "Oh, you're the—" "Yes. You've gotten a lot of attention. Here's your welcome packet." Kyren nodded again. No warmth, just focus. He didn't need a red carpet. He needed an outlet, and bandwidth strong enough to run his updated LX demo. He followed the signs to the competitor's lounge, a spacious room with labeled tables for each school, names he recognized from headlines. Ridgeview Prep, Canyon Valley Academy, Whitemore Institute, each surrounded by clusters of students, mentors and tablet-toting assistants. At the back, a folding table with no label waited for him. Someone had scrawled "Independent" in pen on a piece of masking tape and slapped it on the edge. He sat down and pulled out his laptop, ignoring the eyes that darted toward him, not out of curiosity, but calculation. He could feel the room trying to sort him, not because of his project, but because of how alone he looked. 3 judges entered quietly. Whispers followed them. Among them was Dr. Helena Weiss. She didn't speak to anyone, just scanned the room until her eyes landed on Kyren. She smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, like someone who had just seen a rare star with her own eyes. She didn't approach, didn't interrupt his focus, but her smile lingered. Kyren caught it, nodded once. For the first time that morning, his grip around the mouse loosened slightly, but peace never lasted long. 40 minutes before the first round of presentations, a white boy in an expensive blazer walked over. He wasn't smiling. "Wallace, right?" Kyren didn't look up. "Yeah. You're the compression algorithm guy." "Guess so." The boy leaned closer. "Just letting you know, people are talking." "About what?" "Whether someone like you wrote all that code alone." Kyren finally looked up. "Define someone like me." The boy's smirk faltered. He straightened. "Never mind. Good luck." He walked away before Kyren could respond. But the message had landed, a warning wrapped in pretense, and it wasn't long before it got real. Right before the judges were set to begin evaluations, an announcement echoed through the room. "Contestant Kyren Wallace, please report to the Ethics Committee panel. Immediately." Every head turned. The room stilled. Kyren rose slowly. Confusion wrapped around his spine like ice. As he walked, whispers trailed behind him. He's the one from the video, right? Yeah. The driver's kit. I heard he used AI to fake the results. No one codes that clean without training. Outside the lounge, two officials met him with folded arms and tense expressions. We received an anonymous complaint, one said. What kind of complaint? Kyren asked. The second stepped in. That your code may have been generated, not authored. AI-assisted cheating. Kyren blinked. That's not true. Be that as it may, the first official said, we've decided to request a real-time validation test. Kyren's heart tightened. A live code build? Yes, on stage. No references, no internet access. Just you, a machine, and a prompt. Kyren didn't flinch, but he did pause. Because the accusation wasn't about integrity. It was about doubt disguised as protocol. They weren't testing his code. They were testing his existence inside this space. Fine, Kyren said. I'll do it. The news spread fast. By the time Kyren returned to the staging area, the judges already knew. So did the competitors. Some pretended to look surprised. Others barely hid their smirks. Dr. Weiss was silent, but her eyes burned with something different. Not shock, not anger, but a slow-building rage. Not because Kyren was accused, but because she knew who was behind it. She leaned toward one of the other judges and whispered, "Watch closely." The room dimmed. A large monitor lit up with the rules of the on-the-spot challenge. Kyren stepped onto the presentation stage, alone under the lights. The prompt appeared on screen. Design a lightweight compression model for unpredictable data flows, using limited system memory. Must include real-time error correction and adaptive logic. There were gasps. This wasn't just difficult. It was designed to break him. Kyren sat. No notes, no pre-written code, no safety net, just keys and instinct. The room held its breath. Then the tapping began. At first it sounded random, but then came structure. Patterns. A rhythm, like music only he could hear. He started with a base framework, one he had built from muscle memory, then tweaked the compression ratio logic, then wrapped a smart correction loop, but with a modification that forced it to evolve as new variables were introduced. Dr. Weiss leaned forward in her seat. The boy was improvising innovation. 5 minutes in, one judge whispered, "We don't teach this." Another, "Not even in third-year undergrad." Kyren's hands didn't shake. His eyes didn't drift. Line after line poured from him like water. No hesitations. No errors. No fear. Only flow. When he finished, the monitor blinked. Code compiled successfully. Compression integrity. 97.2% real-time recovery. Passed. Latency delay. Then a single breath from the back.
Then, applause.
Not wild, not exaggerated.
But honest. And coming from the judge's row, Dr. Weiss stood. She didn't say much. Just 3 words that echoed louder than any speech. Let him speak. Strut. Kyren stepped to the mic. He didn't plan to talk, but something in him stirred. They said I used AI, he began, voice steady. But what I built came from nights no machine could survive. He looked out at the crowd. I didn't get here through privilege. I got here through pressure. I didn't have tutors. I had time. I didn't have mentors. I had questions. That's how I learned. He paused. I was never supposed to be in this room. But I'm here, and you can accuse me, doubt me, test me, but you will not erase me. He stepped back. No mic drop, just truth. The crowd rose. And behind him, on the monitor, a single line of his code blinked like a heartbeat. As Kyren exits the stage, a security guard approaches and hands him a sealed envelope with a government seal. Inside is a brief message. Your work has triggered national-level interest. Clearance review pending. Do not leave the premises. Kyren stood motionless, the sealed government envelope still heavy in his hand. As murmurs rippled across the ballroom, most eyes were still fixed on the screen, where his code had just run with near-perfect execution. But some were already shifting to the sudden change in atmosphere, the way security had stepped closer, the way a government seal now sat in plain sight on a table, meant for science fair trophies. He had just cleared one mountain, and another had appeared in its shadow. The stage was cleared for a special session, one not listed in the program, not visible on any schedule. The judges called it a clarification round. Everyone else in the room saw it for what it was. Another test. Another trap. Another chance for the institution to say, "He got lucky. Let's see what happens under real heat." They gave Kyren exactly 5 minutes to prepare. He was handed a blank terminal and a whiteboard. No notes, no prior briefing. The head judge stepped forward. Her voice was flat but formal. "You will write a recursive logic algorithm that solves a variable length compression challenge under shifting parameter conditions. Please explain as you write. Begin when ready." Kyren stared at the screen, his reflection faint in the black glass. Behind him, whispers swelled. Some judges leaned back, skeptical. Others leaned in, curious. And in the far right corner, one person didn't sit. Dr. Helena Weiss stood, eyes unreadable, arms folded tightly, watching as if something beyond the present moment depended on this. Kyren's hand hovered above the keyboard. Tension bloomed in his chest. Not fear of failure, fear of being defined by it. They didn't just want to see if I was good, he thought. They wanted to see if I'd break. He remembered cafeteria leftovers, dim hallway lights, his father nodding off in the van, while Kyren scribbled logic models beside him. He remembered every classroom that ignored him, every teacher who only looked at him when something went missing. His hands shook, only slightly. Then they moved, first slow, then smoother, then sharp. Tap by tap he built the base loop, then added a self-regulating length check, something he'd theorized but never tested. He narrated as he typed, voice low but focused. "This function scans the input stream, calculates dynamic packet sizes based on compression ratios, and stores fallback data in a secondary buffer for adaptive override." One judge raised an eyebrow. "Error correction is handled by reverse propagation rather than fixed recovery cycles. It saves memory and adjusts based on system strain." Another judge blinked. Dr. Weiss tilted her head slightly, intrigued but silent. 3 minutes in, and Kyren's hands were no longer trembling. They were dancing. His fingers moved with a rhythm that didn't come from confidence, but survival. Because for him this wasn't coding. It was breathing. He reached the final block, added the redundancy patch, and hit execute. The terminal blinked. A line of green text appeared. Process complete. 96.4% efficiency. Error margin. Silence. Then one of the judges let out an involuntary whisper. "Jesus." Kyren stood back from the terminal and turned toward them. "I added a temporal failsafe in case the system's architecture changes mid-process. It anticipates fluctuations before they break the stream." The head judge narrowed her eyes. "Where did you learn to build like this?" Kyren didn't smile. "Where I had to." The panel didn't speak for a moment. Then another official leaned into her mic. "You may step down." Kyren nodded and walked off the stage. Every step felt like it echoed louder than the applause that didn't come. Because the applause didn't matter. The silence did. That thick, stunned silence that only ever followed something people didn't expect and didn't want to admit they couldn't explain. Backstage, Kyren sat alone, the government envelope still in his hand, his breath shallow, his palms damp. Then someone else stepped away from the judge's table. Dr. Weiss. She exited through a side door with her phone, already pressed to her ear. Not in outrage, not in awe, in disbelief. Outside the building, she paced in the parking lot, one hand on her temple. "Julian," she said, voice low. "It's Helena." The voice on the other end crackled. "Helena, what time is it?" "I don't care." She paused. "I just watched a kid, a high school kid, build a recursive compression loop that predicts system failure before it happens." There was silence on the line. She continued. "On a blank terminal, in 5 minutes. No notes, no delay." Now Julian spoke. "That's not possible. Not at his level." "I know," she said. "That's why I called." He laughed nervously. "Where'd he train?" "He didn't. That's the point. This wasn't prep. This was pure." A longer pause. Then Julian whispered the words she hadn't expected him to say. "Send me the file." Back inside, Kyren opened the envelope, still half shaking. Inside was a single typed line. "GovTech confirms interest in your Lux prototype. Stay on site. Background security check in progress." It wasn't a threat, it was a trigger. Everything was about to change. Not because he wanted it to, but because it already had. But even in that moment, in the afterglow of his most powerful performance, Kyren didn't feel victorious. He felt alone. He heard the faint sound of another finalist being congratulated. Heard cheers, laughter, hugs from parents, smiles from coaches. He had none of that. Just a chair, a screen, and the constant pressure of being the exception. Then, a sudden buzz hit his phone. Unknown number. No name. A text appeared. They don't want you to win. They want you to prove you never belonged. Keep coding, but trust no one. Kyren stared at it. No reply. Then he turned back to his laptop, opened his LX prototype, and began tweaking the model again. Not for the judges, not for the government, not for Twitter, for himself. For the next test he hadn't even seen coming yet. Because in his world, brilliance wasn't the finish line. It was the beginning of survival.
Back in the judge's suite, a quiet debate erupts. One official whispers, "We can't let him win. It'll set a precedent we can't control." But in the hallway, Dr. Weiss listens, and this time she's not going to be silent.
The ballroom was still humming with the aftershock of Kyren's 5-minute code miracle when the email arrived. Quietly, almost unceremoniously, slipping into his inbox like it belonged there. He didn't see it at first. He was still replaying the judge's reactions in his head. The stunned silence, the half-standing posture of Dr. Weiss, the judge who excused herself mid-test, the way the others tried and failed to hide the fact that they no longer knew what box to keep him in. He was still catching his breath, still coming down from the invisible fight he had been forced to win, when his phone buzzed again. This time, a notification flashed across his screen. Subject line bold, direct, impossible to ignore. Immediate academic opportunity, Yale University. Kyren blinked. He opened it slowly, expecting a generic congratulations, maybe a brochure, or an invitation to apply. Instead it said, "Mr. Wallace, we are prepared to offer you a fully funded early admission position, with immediate deferral until you choose to enroll. No application required. We are aware your brilliance may not fit the linear path, neither should your future." It was signed by the Dean of Computational Sciences, Yale, offering admission to a kid who hadn't even graduated yet. He stared at the screen, hands frozen, not because he doubted it, but because the world had never moved toward him before. He had always been the one pushing, climbing, coding just to be seen. And now an Ivy League school, a place where legacy money and generational power lived, had seen him. He didn't smile. He didn't gasp. He just whispered to himself, "They finally think I exist." He showed the email to his father first. Malcolm read it 3 times, not because he didn't understand, but because a lifetime of hard reality made him suspicious of good news. "This is real?" Malcolm asked. "It came from their academic dean," Kyren said. They watched the stream. Malcolm leaned back in the van's seat, both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. "I always knew you could get anywhere," he said, voice low. "Just never thought anywhere would come looking for you." But good news never traveled alone. By the time Kyren returned to his hotel room that night, the offer had leaked. Screenshots were everywhere. A known education blogger tweeted, "Yale already offering a spot. This is what happens when media pressure forces institutions to pretend merit has a zip code." The replies came fast. "So we're giving Ivy League seats away for trending. You got one good moment, and suddenly he's genius level. This is diversity, on steroids. Imagine working your whole life and losing your spot to someone whose dad drives a bus." They weren't critiquing his work. They were erasing it, reducing it to pity, to charity, to optics, as if the only thing he'd ever built was sympathy. Kyren sat on the edge of his bed, phone glowing in his hand, scrolling through the venom. One comment stuck to him like frostbite. He didn't earn it, they gave it to him. He stared at that line, reading it over and over. He had written code no one could match, solved problems professionals couldn't crack, outperformed a room full of students with private tutors, elite prep tracks, and full-time mentors. But they still thought this was a gift. Something was breaking inside him, not from self-doubt but from knowing he would have to prove himself forever. Meanwhile, the news reached home long before he did. His little sister, Naomi, 11 years old, quiet, funny and fiercely proud of her brother, walked into school the next day wearing his face on her backpack. She thought it would make people smile. Instead, a boy cornered her near the restroom and said, "Your brother's a fraud. My mom says so." Another girl chimed in, "That school only picked him because he's black." Naomi didn't know how to answer that. She just walked away, head down. At recess, 3 kids followed her. "Hey, Yale girl," one said. "How much they pay you to lie?" She didn't answer. She didn't fight. She just sat alone on the edge of the playground, trying not to cry. All she ever knew was that her brother was brilliant, that their dad worked harder than anyone, that they had nothing, and somehow Kyren turned it into something. But the world didn't care about that. Not when it could tear a story down faster than it lifted one up. Back at the hotel, the competition staff requested a security check for Kyren, not to protect him, but to protect the event from unexpected disruptions. He knew what that meant. They were afraid of him, not of what he might do, but of who might attack him. He returned to his room that night and found 15 voicemails, some from reporters, some from tech companies, but most were anonymous, filled with bile. You're stealing opportunities from real students. You don't belong there. Tell the truth. Who wrote your code? One message ended with "You'll never be one of them." He didn't respond. He didn't delete it. He just let the silence sit there, vibrating in the dark. Malcolm tried to keep the worst of it from reaching Kyren's mother, who worked nights and had already seen more struggle than any one woman deserved. But the messages still found her. Someone posted her workplace online. Someone else sent a message saying, "Tell your son to stop pretending," before someone reminds him how the world really works. That night she cried quietly in the kitchen, wiping tears with the sleeve of her uniform. She wasn't afraid for Kyren's talent. She was afraid of what racism looked like when it was threatened. By the time Kyren got home, the apartment mailbox was stuffed with letters, some encouraging, some hateful, some handwritten in shaky ink, but one stood out. It didn't have a stamp or a return address. Someone had slipped it through the door. Inside, a single sentence, "Know your place." Malcolm held it for a full minute before setting it down on the counter. "We're not moving," he said. Kyren didn't answer, not right away. He sat on the worn sofa, the one he'd done homework on since he was 9, and stared at the blank wall. Every achievement brought a new kind of war. He was so tired, tired of being doubted, tired of being tested, tired of being told brilliance looked like someone else. And just when the day felt like it couldn't stretch any darker, something shattered. Glass. The sound exploded through the apartment like a gunshot. Kyren jumped to his feet. Naomi screamed from down the hall. Malcolm ran to the living room, where a brick lay in the center of the floor, surrounded by shards of window glass. Wind pushed the curtain inward. Cold air spilled across the carpet. Kyren slowly approached the brick, hands shaking now. Not from coding, not from pressure, but from the realization that this wasn't digital hate anymore. It had become real, physical. In his home, there was a note tied to it, a single line scrawled in uppercase letters. "Stay in your place." No signature, no face, no name. Just hate that didn't need one. Kyren looked at his father. Malcolm looked back. Agony in his eyes, fire in his jaw. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The police arrive, but instead of reassurance, an officer looks at Kyren and says, "You must have done something to provoke this." And suddenly Kyren realizes the systems that should protect him are the same ones waiting for him to slip. The brick still lay in the center of the living room when the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls. Shattered glass glittered across the carpet like broken truth, and Kyren sat on the edge of the couch, his fists clenched, staring at the front door as if it were about to bring in something worse than a threat. His little sister Naomi was curled beside their mother, too scared to speak. Malcolm stood near the window, silent, jaw tight, trying to stay composed, trying to look like a man the police wouldn't mistake for a problem. The knock was hard. 3 sharp raps that didn't sound like help. They sounded like warning. Malcolm opened the door slowly. 2 officers stood there, not in tactical gear but with the kind of postures that said they weren't here to listen. "You the Wallace family?" one asked, already stepping inside before Malcolm could nod. Kyren stood up. "We're the ones who called. Someone threw a brick through our window." The officer didn't look at the brick. His eyes swept the room, lingered on the mess, the laptop on the table, the family photos. Then he turned to Malcolm. "We've had some reports about this address." Malcolm frowned. "Reports? We're the ones being threatened." The second officer stepped closer. "We're aware your son's been getting a lot of attention. Media, internet, public disruption." Malcolm blinked, confused. "My son's the victim here. You saw the window, right?" The first officer shifted. "And yet, somehow this address is drawing quite a bit of heat. You made a public video recently, didn't you?" Kyren's heart dropped. "That video? The one from the van?" "Yeah," Malcolm said slowly. "I spoke up about what happened to my son. That's not illegal." The officer's tone hardened. "No, But sometimes drawing this much attention creates dangerous environments. Especially in tight communities, people feel unsafe. Tensions rise. Malcolm stared. We feel unsafe. My daughter was almost hit with a brick. The second cop crossed his arms. Have you considered whether all this attention might be making you a target? Kyren stepped forward. So now it's our fault? The first officer turned at him, hand near his belt. Son, I need you to take a step back. Malcolm quickly raised a hand. He's not doing anything. He's just scared. We all are. A pause. Then the radio on the officer's chest crackled. Confirm visual on the Wallace residence. Requesting update. The officer responded calmly. We're on scene. Situation is under review. Malcolm's voice cracked with disbelief. Under review? He stepped forward, finally letting the frustration show. You're standing in a broken home. You're talking to the family that called for help. And instead of asking if my daughter is okay, you're interrogating us like we started this. Silence. Then the first officer took a step closer. We need to ask you a few more questions, sir. Outside. No, Kyren said, stepping in. Ask them here. With all of us. The second officer frowned. We're not making arrests, just a few routine questions. But Malcolm's posture shifted. He'd seen this playbook before, the soft language that led to hard consequences. I'm not going outside without my lawyer, Malcolm said. The officers exchanged a glance. That quiet, dangerous kind of glance. Sir, step outside. Now. No. The first officer reached for Malcolm's arm. Kyren's voice rose. Don't touch him. The second officer barked. Back up now. Malcolm's hands went up. Okay. I'll come out. He walked toward the door. The second he crossed the threshold, one officer pulled out cuffs. What are you doing? Kyren yelled. The officer's voice was cold. Detaining for obstruction. Refusing to comply with police questioning. Malcolm didn't resist. He just looked over his shoulder at his son, pain washing across his face. This is what happens when we ask for protection. They cuffed him like a threat. Like a man they'd been waiting to catch doing something wrong. Like a body, not a father. Kyren ran to the doorway, watching as neighbors stepped out of their homes, phones raised. One even shouted, "What's going on?" Another whispered, "That's the kid from the news." But none of it stopped the officers. Naomi ran behind Kyren, tears streaming. Why are they taking Daddy? Their mother pulled her back, trembling. A voice broke through the crowd, not angry, not panicked, but sharp. Are you arresting him for calling in a hate crime? Everyone turned. A woman stood across the street, phone raised, lens pointed directly at the cops. She wore a press badge around her neck. She wasn't there by chance. I'm a journalist with City Eye Media, she said loudly. This is live. This is rolling. The first officer stiffened. Ma'am, please step back. She zoomed in. I'm filming a black father being handcuffed after reporting an attack on his family. Do you want to clarify your justification for this? Silence. Then a neighbor's voice added, that's the guy who testified in the school video. Another, is this how you treat people who go viral now? The camera kept rolling. The officers paused. Too late. The cuffs were on. The image was already burned into the lens, into the story. Kyren stepped out onto the stoop, fists clenched, chest tight with fury and shame. Not shame for what his father did. Shame for the fact that even after all the speeches, the coding, the awards, the threats, this was still how they were seen. Inconvenient, disruptive, dangerous. He looked into the camera, not for performance, not for attention, but for proof. Proof that they didn't imagine this. Proof that even when they followed the rules, they were still made into suspects. The journalist lowered the camera. Her voice softened. I'm going to make sure people see this. Kyren nodded once. Good. Because they never believe us until it's on video. Malcolm was released 2 hours later. No charges. No apology. Just a warning about keeping things from escalating. He didn't speak much in the car ride home. Just stared out the window, jaw clenched. When they pulled up to the apartment, he looked at his son. They don't care how smart you are, he said. They just care how scared they are. Kyren didn't reply. He didn't have to. That night, the journalist uploads the full video, and it goes viral faster than any of Kyren's achievements. A national anchor ends her show with one final line. You want to know what brilliance looks like in America? It looks like a family being arrested instead of protected. The video spread like fire. Not the one of Kyren's code, not the Yale offer, not even the algorithm that shook up an entire competition. This time, it was footage of a black father in handcuffs, a man who called for help, who reported a hate crime, and was treated like a suspect in front of his own children. A journalist's voice narrated quietly, over the visuals, calm but slicing. A man tried to protect his son. The system tried to silence him, but the camera didn't blink. By morning, it had over 12 million views. By noon, it was on national television. By sundown, people were in the streets. The protest started small. A few parents outside Jefferson Central High, holding handwritten signs. He built it anyway, and protect Black genius. Students joined next, some in Kyren's old hallways, walking out between periods, chanting his name, not just for his talent, but for his survival. Then came the Black STEM organizations. They weren't waiting for universities to act. They launched the Kyren Wallace Initiative, a scholarship fund for underrepresented students in coding, AI, and systems engineering. Within 48 hours, it had raised $270,000. A former NASA engineer tweeted, "They tried to erase him. Instead, they created a movement." Then came the endorsements. Celebrities, athletes, educators. But what struck deepest were the letters from ordinary people, emails and messages from fathers, mothers, students who saw themselves in Kyren. "You made me believe my mind mattered again. I watched them try to break you, but you didn't bend. I showed your video to my son and he said, 'He looks like me.'" For once, Kyren wasn't trending for controversy. He was trending for what he represented. A rebuke to every guidance counselor who said, "Reach lower." A counter to every school board that confused discipline with discrimination. A living reminder that potential doesn't ask permission. At Jefferson Central, tension turned into reckoning. Mr. Halbrake, the teacher who first humiliated Kyren, resigned quietly just 3 days after the arrest video dropped. No press release, no explanation, but the silence didn't protect him. A former student leaked old class recordings, audio clips from months earlier, where Halbrake made offhand comments like, "I don't expect much from the back row. You can't teach discipline to kids raised on chaos." The remarks went viral, not because they were shocking, but because they weren't. They were familiar. To every Black student who had ever been underestimated. To every parent who had sat through concerns about behavior when the real issue was bias. To every student who learned to shrink instead of shine. Kyren never commented on Halbrake's resignation. But when asked by a reporter what he thought of the leaked remarks, he simply said, "I've heard worse. The difference is, this time, the world heard it too." Malcolm tried to keep things normal at home. He still drove, still made sure Naomi got to school, still bought cheap groceries, and fixed what he could with duct tape and prayer. But nothing was normal anymore. Not when news vans waited across the street. Not when he couldn't even buy gas without someone asking, "Aren't you Kyren's dad?" And not when his son was being asked to become something more than a student, a symbol. One evening, an official envelope arrived. State seal, Department of Education letterhead. Kyren opened it slowly at the kitchen table. Malcolm watched, arms crossed, bracing. Inside was a formal request. The State Board of Education formally invites Mr. Kyren Wallace to provide a public testimony at our next oversight hearing on curriculum, equity, and student access. Malcolm stared at it. "You don't have to do this," he said, voice steady but cautious. Kyren didn't look up. "I know. You've already proved enough." Kyren nodded once, then said softly, "Then it's time to say what they don't want to hear." He prepared for days, not with advisors or speechwriters, just his own words, scribbled in notebooks between coding sessions. When the day came, he didn't wear a suit. He wore the same hoodie he had been in when he was pulled from class and accused of cheating. Symbolic, unapologetic. The hearing chamber was packed. Reporters, educators, activists, lawmakers. Some were there out of respect. Some were there to discredit him. But when Kyren walked to the podium, the room fell still. He didn't speak like a student. He spoke like a survivor. "My name is Kyren Wallace," he began. "You know me from headlines. You saw my project. You saw the arrest. But what you didn't see, what none of you ever saw, was how hard it was to stay visible when everything in your system was designed to erase me." He paused. "I didn't come from money. I came from brilliance that didn't wear a badge. I didn't learn in classrooms. I learned in quiet, in pressure, in rooms where teachers didn't even remember my name." Gasps from the crowd. Lawmakers shifting.
I was pulled from class. Interrogated.
Accused. Not because of what I did, but because of what I wasn't supposed to do. Build something. Compete. Win. He looked directly at the board. You say you care about equity. Then why do kids who look like me get tested more than trusted? Why do we need cameras to be believed? Silence. Even the air stopped moving. He finished calmly. I didn't come here to ask for a handout. I came to say this. There are more of me, right now, in your schools, at your back tables, on your watch lists, and they're building in silence, just like I was. He stepped back. No applause protocol, but the audience stood. One by one. Then all at once. Even Malcolm, who had been watching from the very back, eyes glassy, lips pressed shut, stood. Proud didn't feel like a big enough word. That night, as Kyren and his father drive home in silence, his phone buzzes with a private message, this time from an unknown number with a military domain. It reads, "We watched the hearing. Let's talk. You're not just building tech, you're shaping the future. Are you ready?" The auditorium wasn't built for revolution, but that morning it felt like the walls knew something historic was about to happen. Rows upon rows of seats were filled. Educators, board members, journalists, civil rights attorneys, exhausted parents, hopeful students. Most came expecting a spectacle. Few came expecting to be transformed. And in the middle of it all, standing behind a plain wooden podium with nothing but a water bottle and a scarred composition notebook by his side, stood Kyren Wallace. No speechwriter. No suit. No security detail. Just his voice and his story. He didn't begin with credentials or pleasantries. He didn't thank the board for their time or compliment the setting. He looked out at the crowd, directly, unflinching, and began. You saw the video. You saw the brick. You saw the handcuffs. A few people shifted, uncomfortable already. But you didn't see the cafeteria table where I taught myself to write logic trees between bites of cold chicken nuggets. You didn't see the nights I coded while my little sister cried herself to sleep because the heat was off again. He took a slow breath. You didn't see the hallway I walked every day, where teachers passed me like I was furniture. You didn't hear them ask me to be realistic when I said I wanted to build technology that could think. The room was silent. Not bored, not distracted, locked. Kyren's voice didn't rise, but it deepened. You praise innovation. You fund genius. But only when it wears the right badge. Lives in the right zip code. Speaks with the right inflection. I've seen kids get second chances for failing tests I was never even allowed to take. He paused, scanning the room. In your system, poverty isn't an obstacle. It's an assumption. And black skin isn't just a detail. It's a diagnosis. One board member flinched. Kyren stepped closer to the mic. Do you know what it's like to build something from scratch, only to be told you must have stolen it? To be treated like a cheat before you're treated like a student? No one answered. He continued. You don't know what I know. Not really. You haven't felt what it's like to build a machine that compresses data better than any other high schooler in the country, and still be told, that can't be yours. A few in the crowd lowered their heads. You gave me 5 minutes to prove what 4 years of silence tried to erase, and I gave you something better than code. I gave you truth. He closed the notebook gently, then said more quietly, you thought I was an anomaly. I'm not. I'm the result of brilliance you ignore every day. He looked toward the back, where his father stood, arms crossed tightly over his chest. You tried to erase me, Kyren said, but I debugged your system. He stepped back. No crescendo, no mic drop, just the sound of unfiltered truth hanging in the air like smoke after a burn. The room didn't erupt into applause. It rose in silence. Row by row, they stood, some stiff with shock, others trembling with something closer to guilt. A few were crying, but not loudly. Not theatrically. The kind of tears that come from realizing you've been part of a machine you didn't even know you helped build. Even the press paused, unsure whether to lift their cameras or just stand still and listen 1 second longer. At the far end of the board table, one woman, stern, gray-haired, always seen as the holdout on progressive votes, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and didn't care who noticed. Kyren nodded once, then left the stage. No applause could have measured what he just dismantled. Backstage, Malcolm was already waiting. He didn't say anything at first, just pulled his son into a hug that didn't end fast. Then finally he leaned back, eyes glassy. I wish your mom could have seen that. Kyren smiled. Just barely. She did. The hallway was full of whispers, reporters, nervous aides pretending to be busy as they reprocessed everything they thought they understood about the education system. Then a board member stepped out from the meeting room and approached Kyren. Not one of the ones who clapped. Not one who cried. One who had just sat, stiff, unreadable, the entire time. Her suit was pressed to perfection, her shoes quiet against the tile. She held a folded letter in her hand, thick paper sealed in gold. "Mr. Wallace," she said, tone even. "This is not public yet, but I want you to read it before the next announcement goes live." She handed it to him, then walked away. No smile, no wink, just a sense of something shifting. Kyren opened it slowly, his father leaning in to glance. Inside was a single printed message. "You've been selected for direct entry to the President's Advanced Tech Council, a federal advisory group reserved for future leaders in AI, data systems, and ethical coding. You are its youngest ever appointee. The White House will contact you within 48 hours. Malcolm froze. Kyren stared at the page for a full 10 seconds before whispering, "They want me to help shape the rules." Malcolm looked at him, eyes wide with awe. He rarely showed. "They want you in the room." Kyren nodded slowly. "Not just in the room," he said. "At the table." Just as Kyren folds the letter, a notification pings on his phone. An anonymous message with a blurred photo attached him and his sister outside their apartment. The caption reads, "They can put you in the White House. But don't forget, we still know where you live." Early Monday morning, the lobby of Denim Tech Global gleamed like a fortress of ambition. Polished floors reflected suits and briefcases, and digital banners broadcast the latest quarter's profits and every industry-first patent. But at 9:02, the entrance doors opened for someone none of them expected. Kyren Wallace stepped through with a simple backpack. No suit, no entourage, no press waiting outside. Just a student turned intern walking into a company that had long been part of the machine, built to keep him out. The head of security scanned his badge and directed him to the orientation lounge. On the way, he passed mounted portraits of the company founder, his father's face among them. Most employees nodded with small smiles as he went by. A few didn't look up. Whispers began immediately. "Isn't that the kid from that viral speech?" "Yeah, I think the intern who cracked the national test. He's working here now." Inside the conference room, a dozen young professionals sat with laptops and welcome packets. The HR guy introduced Kyren last. "Kyren Wallace, our summer systems architecture intern." Polite applause. The instant clapped pause. Layered tension. He scanned the room. Faces turned. Phones discreetly raised. One young woman covered her screen with a hand. One man shifted uncomfortably. Some weren't ready for someone like him. When the HR man finished, a senior executive took the floor. Crisp tie. Pressed shirt. He didn't smile. He didn't praise. "Mr. Wallace, your desk will be prepared. You'll have access to our internal cloud sandbox and lead engineers assigned to your project. Welcome aboard." Kyren's jaw tightened. His heart buzzed with recognition. Not because he was honored, but because he now had space where they didn't believe he belonged. His first week was under scrutiny. Mentors checked his login logs. Executives checked his email logs. Security ran keyword filters on his code contributions. For him, every repository commit carried implication. But Kyren didn't change. He didn't soften. He didn't ask for leniency. He walked to his desk in the Edge Systems lab and pulled out his laptop. The screen lit up, and his fingers hovered. He didn't wait for instructions. He did what he always did: start building. He addressed the cloud infrastructure problem the company had been wrestling with for months. Data flows bottlenecked under remote load. Device edge systems couldn't sync efficiently. Executives complained. Investors asked questions. Kyren sketched a solution by lunch. He drafted a compression edge sync protocol that would let remote hubs process data locally before syncing, reducing central server strain by up to 60%. It used a dynamic packet reallocation matrix that he'd previously tested in his LX prototype, now adapted for their architecture. He submitted his draft to his mentor Lydia Marsh, a sharp engineer with doubt flickering in her eyes. Lydia read it, then studied Kyren. This is impressive," she said quietly. "Where did you learn to design this?" Kyren didn't smile. "I studied problems other people ignored." She nodded, but the nervousness in her voice made it clear. He was rewriting their foundation. The next day, a private meeting. Carter Russell, Chief Technology Officer, called Kyren in. His office overlooked the city skyline. The view made the room silent in a way that felt like expectation. "Mr. Wallace," Carter said, "we're impressed. Your prototype is promising. But I must ask, are you comfortable with the spotlight? Your work here will be visible. Within the company. To our board. To our investors." Kyren leaned back. "I'm comfortable when I'm coding. I'd rather you watch results than me." Carter nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But I must be transparent. You weren't our typical hire. Some investors already raised concerns." Kyren waited. One of our board members wrote, "Why is a controversial intern given so much power? They're questioning whether risk outweighs innovation." Kyren's eyes locked with Carter's. "If innovation looks like risk, then maybe your risk calculation is broken." Carter exhaled. "Well said. Let's keep going." As the weeks passed, Kyren's protocol entered testing. Simulations showed a 48% reduction in server load. Edge data hubs near remote locations improved sync times by 35%. Executives smiled publicly, but some board members furrowed brows privately. Meanwhile, inside the open plan lab, whispers continued. At lunch, a group of engineers murmured, "I heard the intern never went to college. He grew up in a Title I school. They gave the billion-dollar problem to a kid from nothing." Kyren overheard some. Others didn't realize he did. He didn't care. He cared about data. And he cared about being the problem solver. He held weekly demos. He discussed log metrics. He answered questions. None mentioned provenance. Only performance. But outside the lab, the provenance argument raged. On social media, old headlines resurfaced. "Driver's son cracks code," and "Black student wins national spotlight." Comments ranged from praise to disgust. One major investor, attending the final demo from a remote link, posted a private message to the board. "This is too much. We don't back interns playing heavy tech. What's our exit plan if this blows up?" The message leaked. Suddenly, the intern's prototype wasn't just a tech problem. It was an optics problem. A legacy problem. Then came the unexpected twist. Late Friday night, Kyren got a secure email from the CEO, not the CTO. The founder's son, Asher Denham's father, himself. The subject line read, "Dinner, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Kyren raised his eyebrows. The last time he'd been near the Denham house, the vibe had been competitive, hostility wrapped in white linen, and power trading. He accepted. At dinner, the table was large, the wine flowing for the adults, the food flawless. The founder, Gerald Denham Sr., leaned forward. "Kyren," he said, voice genuine, "what you're building here, it's extraordinary. You've upset our metrics. In a good way. But more than that, you've upset our world." Kyren sat quiet, tipping his glass of water. Gerald continued, "I'm sorry for the way our institution underestimated you. For the way our industry underestimated you. You're not supposed to be here." Kyren looked at him. "Black kid. Title I school. Driver's son. And you didn't ask for a handout," Gerald said. "You made yourself. That's important." Kyren pressed his lips shut. The founder's tone was respectful, but his eyes carried a question. "What do you want from this company?" Kyren paused. "I want you to build the infrastructure for the 99%, not just the elite 1%. A hush. Gerald nodded slowly. "Then you'll need us. And we'll need you." The handshake felt different. Not mentorship. Not patronage. Contract. Kyren left with new clarity. He wasn't just the intern. He was a partner in transformation. A partner they hadn't anticipated. On Monday morning, the board's investor meeting convened. Kyren's pilot results jumped on screen. CFO highlighted cost savings. CTO praised vision. But one voice cut through. "Gentlemen, and Ms. Marsh," one investor began, "we must address the elephant in the room. Why are we trusting a student with billion-dollar architecture? Why is the precedent being set that anyone can come here and get the keys?" The boardroom quieted. Lydia Marsh, Kyren's mentor, stood. "Because this architect just saved us millions in server costs. He's earned the keys." The room shifted. But the investor wasn't done. "Let me put it plainly. He has no degree, no industry ties. Does that matter?" Kyren sat in his lab, virtually present via screen link, watching the meeting unfold. He understood the unstated comment. If we elevate him, we must elevate others like him. If we integrate him, we must integrate the whole system. That election of possibility terrified some. Back at his desk later, Kyren opened a message from Lydia. Good job today. She added one line that caught him off guard. We're all watching. Don't let them trick you into settling. He replied simply, I won't. But inside he felt the weight, not just of code, but of expectation, of representation, of systems built to exclude. He finished logging the final commit for the week. The number scrolled up. Edge sync efficiency 61. Latency reduction 0. Results that silent walls had told him he couldn't achieve. That evening, Kyren walked through the deserted parking garage to his car. The lights flickered. Echoes dripped. He felt eyes on him, not the ones from his rookie days at school, but corporate ones, financial ones, systemic ones. He got into his car. The radio murmured background noise. On his phone, another alert. One investor's email. We're reconsidering full funding, unless oversight is increased. Kyren exhaled slowly. He multiplied the copy path. He xeeped the final archive. He closed the terminal, because now his code wasn't just architecture. It was a battleground. As Kyren shuts down his system for the night, a pop-up appears on Helena Weiss's secure inbox. In reference to Wallace's internship prototype, the Pentagon's DARPA division requests immediate briefing. They need the codebase by tomorrow. The boardroom tension didn't dissolve overnight, but the data didn't leave space for debate. Kyren's prototype went live on Monday. By Friday, internal cloud reports showed a 71% reduction in data lag. Server costs dipped by a quarter. Error recovery rates outperformed the existing infrastructure by Executives praised the numbers in closed-door meetings. Publicly, they stayed neutral. But investors? They started calling. Not to pull out. To buy in. The same ones who had once asked why a controversial intern had back-end access were now suggesting patents, white papers, and exclusive licensing. The same hands that once pointed at his background now reached for his brilliance like it was currency. Kyren didn't change. He didn't give interviews. He didn't attend board dinners. He stayed at his desk, coding quietly, headphones in, screen glowing. The new king. Invisible, unbothered, undeniable. He didn't respond when a senior software architect left an anonymous note in the break room that read, Affirmative action nail achievement. He just shipped a patch the next morning that caught an error the architect had missed for months. A patch that stopped a security flaw from leaking data to a third-party vendor. No bragging, no memo, just precision and undeniable value. He didn't correct whispers in meetings. Didn't reply to condescending comments about his unorthodox approach. He let results bend those voices into silence. Because Kyren understood something they didn't. In their world, silence meant weakness. In his world, silence was strategy. He was playing chess in a room full of people stuck playing politics. Behind the scenes, Denim Tech's quarterly report broke records. Shareholders praised the cutting-edge optimization. Tech analysts wrote articles about a mysterious young talent whose internal upgrades had reshaped industry norms. The press still didn't know his name, not officially, and Kyren liked it that way. Until one Tuesday morning, after 3 months of silence, Carter Russell, the CTO who once doubted him, walked into the lab with a rare expression, humility. He cleared his throat as Kyren wrapped up a data stream diagnostic. We'd like to extend a permanent offer, Carter said. Lead engineer. You'll helm the full system redesign division. We'll match whatever you're being offered elsewhere. Kyren looked at him, expression unreadable. No degree. Still controversial, he said flatly. Carter shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Yes, but now, you're profitable. The honesty was both offensive and refreshing. Kyren closed his laptop. I'll think about it. Carter nodded and walked away. But Kyren had already decided. He wouldn't say yes, not yet, because the offer didn't feel like opportunity. It felt like containment. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, a man who once said, "There's no way you solve that without help," stood behind a desk covered in laminated worksheets and cheap whiteboard markers. Mr. Halbrake, former calculus gatekeeper of Jefferson Central, now worked at an underfunded tutoring center, just blocks from where Kyren once waited for the bus in the snow. His office window didn't open all the way. His students came in tired, distracted, sometimes hungry. No one whispered his name with reverence. No investors watched his chalk lines. He said all the right things now. Everyone can learn. Background doesn't define brilliance. But his voice carried a hollowness that even he couldn't ignore. He'd watched the speech, seen the videos, read the articles. No one ever mentioned him by name. That, somehow, made it worse. He hadn't just been proved wrong. He had been erased by Kyren's excellence. Silently. Completely. Kyren never said a word about him. Not in interviews. Not in speeches. Not even in private. Because his revenge wasn't about dragging someone down. It was about building so far beyond the insult that it became irrelevant. And then it came. Late one Thursday night, after logging off from a final sync, Kyren checked his inbox before shutting down. There it was. A plain subject line. Federal Innovation Task Force. White House appointment consideration. No fluff. No ceremony. Just a message that read, Mr. Wallace, your recent work in decentralized system logic and compression streamlining has drawn national attention. We are assembling a federal advisory group focused on emerging tech, equity-driven innovation, and secure infrastructure. You've been nominated to serve as the youngest advisory lead in our country's history. Kyren didn't react at first. He reread the words 3 times, not because he didn't believe them, but because deep down he already expected this. He had built something so undeniable, so uncontainable, that not even the politics of race and class could fence it off anymore. He forwarded the message to his father. Malcolm called within 2 minutes. You serious? He asked, voice shaking. Kyren didn't joke. Yeah, it's real. Silence stretched between them. Then Malcolm exhaled. They're putting you in rooms where the future gets written. Kyren nodded, almost to himself. Which means I don't get to be quiet anymore. That night, he walked through the old neighborhood, past the corner store where he used to get hot chips with leftover lunch change, past the cracked sidewalk he once mapped algorithms on in his notebook. He thought of Naomi, who now walked through her school with her head high. He thought of every other kid coding in silence, not for grades, not for praise, but because they knew they were more than the narrative written for them. He stood under a flickering street lamp and whispered, this was never about revenge, then added, it was about proof. Just as he turns to leave, another email pings into his inbox. This one encrypted military grade, subject line, confidential. Project Lux flagged by international intelligence. High-level threat or high-level asset. Immediate classification request pending. The room was nothing like a classroom, but Kyren couldn't help the comparison. The White House's Eisenhower Executive Office building stood regal, draped in flags and heavy with history. Every polished hallway felt like it had witnessed generations of change and resistance to it. But today, one of those rooms was filled with something else. Intention. Kyren adjusted the collar of his jacket. It was sharp, custom, not loud. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to implement. The event was closed to the public, but news cameras were allowed. A podium stood at the front, flanked by a federal seal and 2 high-resolution monitors displaying the initiative's logo, LX Rising, a nod to the very prototype that had rewritten not only Denim Tech's infrastructure, but the narrative around who gets to innovate. This time, Kyren wasn't the intern. He was the architect. Not just of code, but of systems. His eyes scanned the crowd. Among the faces, leaders of Black STEM organizations, educators, federal analysts, and 2 civil rights attorneys who had helped him quietly sue Jefferson Central's administration in the background. He never publicized that win. The settlement helped fund the early design of today's program. And then his eyes landed on the most important face in the room. Malcolm Wallace. His father wore the same old brown jacket he'd worn when driving night shifts. The sleeves were a little worn now. The lining faded. But he refused to replace it. It had carried too many dreams in its pockets. Malcolm stood straight, chin high, hands folded. No tears this time, just pride. Kyren exhaled slowly and stepped up to the podium. He didn't bring notes. He never did. My name is Kyren Wallace, he began. Some of you know me from videos, some from headlines. But I'm not here to relive the story. I'm here to change how it ends. He paused, scanning the room. When I was 17, I stood in a classroom and solved a math problem. My teacher laughed. He said, "You couldn't have done that without private tuition." What he meant was, I wasn't supposed to be brilliant. Not with my zip code. Not with my skin. A quiet shift in the audience. But brilliance doesn't wait for permission. Kyren's voice never wavered. Today we're launching the LX Rising initiative, a $20 million federal investment into tech mentorship, curriculum reform, and coding infrastructure for underrepresented students. Not just to level the field, to change the field. He glanced at Malcolm again. I didn't get here because I was exceptional. I got here because my father drove double shifts to keep our lights on, because I coded on borrowed Wi-Fi, because I believed in possibility louder than their disbelief. The monitors behind him shifted to a map, dozens of red pins glowing across low-income regions, representing schools that would receive early access to ULUX Rising pilot labs. We're going to train 10,000 new engineers over the next 5 years. We're going to place 2,000 in paid apprenticeships. And for every student who was told they were too much or too unlikely, we're going to fund their futures, not fear them. Applause broke, low but strong. He finished. I'm not here because of revenge. I'm here because legacy is louder than insult. And I believe the final equation is simple. Dignity ties legacy, change. He stepped back, letting the words settle. Malcolm closed his eyes and whispered under his breath. That's my boy. The signing came next. A long white desk, a dozen pens lined up for formal ceremony, flanked by tech leaders, Department of Education reps, and members of the President's Innovation Council. Kyren leaned over the executive document with quiet grace. Flashbulbs burst. He scrawled his name with the pen that would be framed later, not as a trophy, but as a receipt for every moment. Someone said, "You don't belong here." Miles away, in a small school in Arkansas, the broadcast played on an old TV in a crumbling computer lab. A 13-year-old black girl named Anya sat at a cracked plastic desk, hands resting on a slow-loading Chromebook. Her class wasn't supposed to be watching. The district had blocked live political broadcasts, but their teacher, Mr. Reynolds, had made an exception. "Just watch," he'd said. "You need to see this." As Kyren's speech ended, and the screen faded to the ULUX Rising logo, Anaya whispered so low only her reflection in the monitor could hear. "If he can, so can I." And something inside her shifted. Something quiet, but permanent. Back in D.C., as the room cleared and handshakes faded, Malcolm placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You didn't just write code," he said. "You rewrote what they thought of us." Kyren smiled, small and sincere. "I just got started." But then, just as they reached the corridor to leave, a White House aide jogged up behind them. "Mr. Wallace," she said, breathless. "One more thing." She handed him a secure tablet with a message flagged "Eyes Only." Kyren read the preview on the lock screen. "Confidential. Lux protocol shows early signs of predictive modeling beyond initial parameters. DoD recommends classified meetings subject now considered potential Tier 1 national asset." His eyes widened, not with fear, but realization. His invention hadn't just created educational access. It had evolved into something far greater, something neither he nor the government fully understood yet. He looked at his father, whose expression had shifted from pride to concern. "What does that mean?" Malcolm asked. Kyren didn't answer right away. He looked at the tablet again, then back at the hallway where his name now echoed. "It means," he said finally, "the system that tried to contain me might now depend on me." As Kyren closes the tablet, his phone vibrates. A new secure message from DARPA. Lux variant detected in foreign surveillance sweep. Deployment suspected outside U.S. borders. Emergency debrief scheduled. You built more than you know. Fade to black. Legacy just became global. If a story like this makes your chest tighten, if you've ever seen brilliance dismissed because of the skin it came wrapped in, then you already know silence is not an option. Some voices fight to be heard. Others fight just to exist. If you believe every kid deserves more than doubt, type yes. If you believe in justice,